So the other day, I received a text from my neighbor asking me if I would be willing to be a witness to them signing their will. Of course, I said sure, but I also let them know that a will may not be just enough for them. So today on this Wealth Twin show, we're going to talk about why a will may not be enough, especially if you want to build generational wealth. So let's jump into it, Nicole. What is the main reason why you think, and I'm not sure if you have the same opinion, why you think a will may not be enough when it comes to handling your estate?
Wills are definitely something. If let's just start off the conversation. If you have nothing at all, then definitely a will is a great first step, right?
I agree.
Now, are there better things that you could use to protect your assets and also pass them down to the people you want to have them? Yes, and that's what we're going to get into today. So, my main issues when it comes to a will is that the first thing that comes to mind is that it can go to probate, depending on how large the estate is. So, the estate is any assets that the deceased person owned that can go into probate, and probate means it has to go to court, and the court decides what happens to the assets and who actually gets the assets. They get to direct where the assets are, even if you have a will. It is still subject to probate in a lot of instances. So I think that's my biggest issue when it comes to wills.
Now, just going back to the probate. So basically, if you have any property in your name and you have a will, it's definitely going into probate. And I'm talking from a New York State point of view. If you have an estate that's worth over $30,000, it's going to go to probate because most likely it's going to include some kind of real estate. Now, when we say it's assets and stuff like that, anything that you can assign directly to a beneficiary, like your retirement accounts, that will skip the whole probate process. But having a will does not tell you it goes automatically to the people you want it to go to. It has to go through the court process so that the judge can say, you know what, this will is something that I think is legit. And I will more likely than not be willing to carry out what is written in this will. It's really up to the judge's discretion. Okay. So the probate process can be very expensive because there are set fees for going through that process, the court fees, the filing fees, different fees like that. And it's also a percentage of your estate. So those fees can really tack on. And having a will, especially if you have property, will guarantee that you will go through the probate process. And your will, whatever is stated in your will, may not be honored the way that you want it stated in your will. So that's one of the
Now,
reasons I think having a will, it's not enough.
Now, on top of the amount of money it costs in terms of the fees for probate, another thing that's uh, not the greatest when it comes to wills and having to go through probate is the length of time it takes. I know in New York, it's probate court is out for like at least a year, depending on where you are in New York. And if you want your assets to go to the people you care about, especially if there's assets that they need at that moment, if they're cash strapped, having to wait just to get a court date to actually get into probate, that length of time, if you can avoid it, you want to avoid it, right? And there's different ways that you can avoid that, and we're going to get into those in a little bit later. So one, we got the probate fees and the length of time it takes to actually get your document reviewed by probate court.
Yeah, I think after COVID, the probate courts just got backed up and it's more like a 2 year wait in a lot of cases, especially in certain states. But another thing is when people say, oh, you should have a will, I think people need to understand having a will does not guarantee that somebody's going to find that will once you pass away, especially if you didn't let anybody know where the will was placed. So if you pass away, again, a will is just a document. And if you pass away and no one knows where your will is, whatever you had written in that will cannot be honored because no one can find the will. That's
Yeah.
another reason I think that having a will, it's kind of it lacks other things that other vehicles that you can use to protect your estate have over it. A will is just a piece of paper. It's a document. It just states what your wishes are, but it doesn't mean that someone's going to automatically find it. And if maybe someone does know, but if that person has malintentions, maybe they just say, oh, there's no will that exists. And then it goes into something else called intestate, which is a whole nother thing. Nicole and I have been going through that personally with some family members lately, and it's a big nightmare. So, Nicole, what are some things that we think is probably more beneficial having than just a will or in place of a will?
Okay, so if let's just one more thing when it comes to wills. If you choose to have a will, and like I said, a will is better than nothing. If you choose to have a will, the thing you can do on top is actually name an executor. That's the person or entity that's going to actually be the one that actually um, tells what your wishes are in
And
the
they're going to
will.
be the
So
one paying out the money too. There's
yeah,
a lot
so
of
there's
responsibility.
another problem with the wills is that it's a public document, so creditors can come after you for that as well. Okay, so what can you do? And by the way, Nadia and I are no means experts. We're just going through this ourselves, and we wanted to share our experience and also, you know, tell you what we're doing in the case of this, because at one point it's going to happen to all of us, right?
Hmm.
So when it comes to what could be better, the first thing that you can do without even lawyers' help is actually named beneficiaries, right? Because a beneficiary is who you designate to have ownership of the account or your assets after you pass. So you can pass it down to your children or whoever you want, your spouse or your significant other. So some of these things that can have a beneficiary attached to it would be, like Nadia was saying earlier, your retirement accounts. You can designate who you want your retirement account money to go to. You can designate a beneficiary when it comes to your bank accounts. You can designate a beneficiary when it comes to your bond accounts, right? So naming a beneficiary not only could allow it to go to the person you want it to, it can also allow it to be avoided in a probate court. Just having a designated beneficiary on some of your accounts can help get your wishes the way you want them to be actually done.
I will say this: when it comes to beneficiaries, make sure you have them up to date. Because when I first got out of school, Nicole was the beneficiary on all of my accounts, right? But then I got married and I had kids. When I got
Wait a
married,
minute,
it
I'm not
switched to
still
my
the
husband.
beneficiary? I should still
No,
be
you're
the
not.
beneficiary.
No, you're not at all. It switched to
Oh,
my
man.
husband. And then when I had kids, it switched to my kids. So this makes sure they're up to date, especially if you had another marriage or anything like that. Make sure that the beneficiary
Say if
on your
something
accounts is
happens
the
to the other
person.
beneficiaries.
Hmm?
I said if something happens to one of the beneficiaries that were actually labeled on the document, you wanna update that as well,
Yeah. So my
right?
main point is to make sure you have it up to date because things change, life goes on, and you may forget to do this and you're going through the motions and you forget. And then at the end of the day, maybe the assets that you accumulated because on this channel, we're helping you build your wealth. And if you work that hard to accumulate assets, you want it going to the people who you think will need it if you after you pass away. So just make sure your beneficiaries are up to date so there's no surprises and any bad blood or anybody who say, well, these kids are adults now. They shouldn't be getting it if you had another family or younger people who actually could benefit from the assets you left to them, right? Um, just
Getting half
jumping
of it
back.
either.
What did you say?
I said you don't want your ex getting half of your assets when you're
Exactly. You
already
don't want
married
your
to
current
somebody else.
spouse getting nothing and your ex spouse getting everything because I've had several friends that had happened to. So just make sure everything's up to date. And just if we're speaking about spouses, say you're living in a house with your spouse, make sure that spouse is on the title of the house. That's another way you can avoid probate when it comes to property. Make sure you have something called joint tenancy because I bought my first house before I was married. So I have to go through the changes and make the changes in order to make sure that if anything ever happens to me, that goes to my children and my husband. But if you have the same situation, you bought something prior to being married, you have to make sure the person you're married to it's on that title and that deed so that if you do pass away, it doesn't have to go through probate. They don't have to pay any fees to stay in the same house you guys were living in together.
Now, on top of titling, you can also title different assets. You can title vehicles, right? You can title cars, you can title boats, motorcycles. So those things you can actually title and you can go to your state office, like say the motor vehicles, to actually put the title, the beneficiary into someone else's name. So you can do that. Now, another thing, because what we don't want to happen is that we don't want to have any missing accounts that are not known to the people that we want to leave assets to. So one of the things me and my husband have is a big binder with all of our information that we keep so that if something was to happen to us or one of us, we would know what assets were available and where they would be stored and things like that. So having a binder with some important documents and letting someone know that this binder is available can definitely help when it comes to distributing the things that you want to give to the people you care about. Because I know when it came to our father, it was very difficult to find different things, seeing what he owned and what he didn't know, who he owed. Those things could have been made a lot easier had he had a binder that let us know what he wanted in terms of his wishes.
Now, I know this may sound like a morbid topic, but I'm gonna tell you now. A lot of people focus on funerals, but there's a whole another thing that happens after the funeral, and this is when you're gonna get into this type of subject. And I don't want people to be caught off by surprise. And this is what can tear families apart, especially if people think certain wishes weren't honored. It's the easiest way is to make sure you're plan out your estate before you pass,
Yeah.
preferably so that you know everybody knows where everything stands. And one of the ways to do that is by building out or creating a trust. Okay. A lot of these issues can be avoided by creating an irrevocable trust or a revocable trust, which is also called a living trust. The living trust can be updated while you're alive, but it also provides you more protection than a will actually would for you and your loved ones who you choose to share in the assets you have once you pass away. So if you want more power over how and where your assets are split up among the people that you care for, trust is a better way on top of a will or in place of a will to have if you really want your wishes handled the way you want after you pass away.
Yeah, I would say I would go with multiple different things. You have a will, then you name your beneficiaries, you do the titling, and also you look into estate planning for such as a living trust or a irrevocable trust. Now, when you come to saying that this is a morbid video, I don't like to say that. I like to say this is the time we can be logical, right? Because
I
once
agree.
emotions, take over, if we're not logical while we're alive, the emotions will be too great for the people that we leave behind, right? So it's our duty as being responsible adults, if we have the things that we actually have accumulated through our life that we want to be taken care of, it's our duty to be logical and figure out a way to pass those things down so that we can lessen the burden on the people that come after us and actually make it a easier situation for them to deal with. Okay, because dealing with just the funeral and everything else is one thing, but on top of that, it does get vicious when it comes to, oh, I want this. No, this person wanted that for me. Don't you know
I
I
agree.
was her favorite? None of that has to be
I agree.
discussed or contested because you have these documents in place. Okay. So it makes things to be logical and rational rather than just emotional. And it helps everyone in the process. Okay. Now, another thing, because we're living in a new time, I would say digital assets, right? Because a lot of things we have are now digitized.
I
We
agree.
have our social media accounts, we have our websites, we have our maybe
The
digital
passwords for your
assets.
bank accounts.
Yeah, the digital bank accounts, all those things are digital photos. You know how many times we want to keep photos from different people? And now most of us are taking photos and putting on our cell
That's
phones,
true.
right? But those photos are being stored somewhere. So those things, people want those too. And I think you should have a plan for those as well. So let's not forget about those digital assets as well.
I agree. I could be much better, especially with my cryptocurrency. I could be a little better at letting people know where it is. So if something does happen, at least that's not lost in space somewhere and nobody knows what it
Mhm.
is in this black box. I know you know, Nicole, but it's just so that
I
more
don't know.
people know. But like, yeah, you're right. We it's as part of an adult, as part of adulting, it is prudent for you to make sure that you have all these things lined up because we all going to go at one time. We never know when we're going to go. So there's better to plan this out so that you do it once, get it out of the way. You don't have to think about it anymore, but you know that your loved ones are taken care of once the process is done. Now, a lot of people might think that, oh, estates using a trust to manage your estate is going to be super expensive. It's not as expensive as going through probate. A will can be free. You can do a will on a piece of paper, have a witness, and just have it done like that. And it can be very cheap. We know a trust costs more money, but at the end of the day, that little bit more that you're paying will alleviate a lot of headaches, a lot of confusion, and a lot of hurt in the future. And it will cost your family a lot less than probate costs would be for them if you don't have some kind of trust in place, like a revocable or irrevocable trust. So that's my opinion. I think if a price is a concern for you, don't let the cost, the initial cost of having a trust, sway you to going to a will. Look at the pros and cons of both of them and then take the cost out. It's probably maybe 10 times more to create a trust. And when I say 10 times more, maybe it's like 3,500 to create a trust with a lawyer. But that 3,500 it's good money spent if you're looking at what happens down the line if you don't have something similar.
Yeah, I think when it comes to cost, this is when you want to get the professionals involved, right?
Yeah.
What you could do on your own is do your own research, try to streamline the process in terms of making your beneficiaries, designating those. But then it is, in my opinion, is better to pay for the professional in this case because you want to make sure that things, all the I's are dotted, all the T's are crossed, right? So with this, I would not go that cheap in terms of building out a trust. And on top of that, in terms of cost and in terms of people think that trusts are mainly for rich people, very rich people. No, they're for people who want to have more control of where the assets are going. So it's not a rich versus poor people. It's if you care about the assets you have accumulated and you want to see how they're directed, then you should be looking into estate planning and look into trust lawyers or estate planning lawyers and also making trust for yourself and for your family. It's also good when you have young children who are below the age of 18 or whatever the minor age in your state is, because a trust also helps if something was to happen to you. It will help have that whatever you need directive on their behalf going on the way you want it to go to. So that's something else to consider, especially if you have young children.
Yeah, and I think if you need help with the cost, a lot of your employers might offer you something that you can pay a certain percentage each month out of your paycheck towards legal services. And if you look on the website of most of those legal services, estate planning is covered for free, or a couple of hours with a state lawyer. It's either covered by the payments that you've been making on a biweekly basis based on your paycheck. So if you're worried about the cost, look into those services because your employer may have that already available for you. And it's just a matter of ticking a box and saying, hey, add this to what I take out of my paycheck every 2 weeks. Okay. So don't let cost, there's ways to get around that. But we're just saying don't be cheap when it comes to this. And
Yeah,
on top of just avoiding probate, the tax implications of having a will versus having a trust can be thousands of dollars, right? You can have more tax protection when you have a trust, and there's no tax protection for your estate when it comes to a will. And like Nicole said before, creditors can come after the stuff in your will because it's a public record at that part, but a trust is separated from you. Trust is separate entity, it's not assets. The creditors cannot come after what's in that trust.
I would say another thing you can do besides a will, if you really are concerned with how you want your wealth to be distributed, and it might not be the most popular opinion, but it's something that even billionaires are doing, is to actually give things away while you're alive, right? We don't have to wait. There's no rule that says you have to wait to give the people you care about the wealth that you have given, that you have created, to give them. You have to wait until you pass away in order to give it to them. So one of the things I plan on instilling is as my children get older, or hopefully whenever a little bit further along from now, in a couple of years from now, my husband and I will start giving away some of our assets because we want to make sure it goes to who we want it to and how we want it to be handled. So that's another way that you can actually get around having a will if your main goal is to make sure your assets are being directed the way you want them to.
Yeah, I hope I'm on that list of who you're giving that stuff to. I don't want any of
It
your old
it it
clothes.
changes day to day when it
It
comes to you.
changes day to day. Well, we tried to lighten the mood a little bit, but what we basically wanted to get across in this video is that I feel like we've been all told get a will, have a will, have a will for years, but then people don't tell you what happens after you have a will and it actually has to take in effect. It's a lot of shortcomings. So there are other vehicles out there that may be better, and there's other things you could do for free, like assigning your beneficiaries and then giving stuff away before you pass away that might work out better for you than just having a will. A will is not the whole complete story that everybody makes it seem to be. Okay. And we're
Mhm.
figuring out this later on because we're going through this for the last 2 or 3 years. There's people passing away as they get older, and you realize like this is a complicated process. How can you make this easier? Okay. And I'm sure a lot of you have probably gone through the same thing. And when people think about this, they only think about the funeral cost. Funeral lasts probably for the first week, but all of this can last for years. So this is just something that you can do to take some pressure off your family and give them some kind of gift from the beyond to let them know this is what I worked hard for. This is what I want to do to take care of you, even though I'm not here. So if you guys like content like this, make sure you subscribe to our newsletter called The Wealth Pack. And like any other pack, We make sure that no one's left behind. It's free, and the link to join is in the description below. We hope you like this episode of the Wealth Twins Show, and let us know what you think in the comments.
As always, thank you for listening. And if you enjoyed this episode, please give us a like and subscribe to the channel. Until the next time, guys, see ya.